Ann and I recently watched the highly acclaimed documentary called simply The Gatekeepers. It was not a night of casual viewing, entertainment, and popcorn. One of the promos said, "If you have any interest at all in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then The Gatekeepers is essential viewing." This gripping, disturbing film, it says, an Israeli-European production, features brutally frank interviews with 6 retired heads of Israel's security agency called Shin Bet. These are intertwined with raw and sometimes brutal scenes of agency operations in the West Bank and Gaza. End quote. The film shows footage of smart bombs blowing up actual homes or vans containing people that the Israelis suspect of being terrorists. And they do their due diligence. They have evidence. It wasn't just a special effect in a movie. We watched people's final moments on Earth, and they never knew what hit them. I found that I couldn't let go of the film's images and impact, or maybe it wouldn't let go of me. And that's when I knew I had to preach about it. One of the former spy chiefs boldly touched on the slippery moral confusion, saying calmly something that we all know is true, but still coming from him it had more impact. He said, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter." What do you do with that? In other words, just about any action by either side can be justified depending on your political perspective. Another spy chief acknowledged that he indeed was seen as a terrorist by the Palestinian enemies. There's enough bloodshed to go around on both sides. But rather than saying, "What can you do?" and stepping up the retaliations, these powerful insiders bear their troubled souls on film. It's a remarkable thing to have accomplished. Israeli columnist Bradley Burston says these words. He said, "They know more than anyone. They know exactly what it took. They saw what the rest of us did not. They directed and carried out and stomached what the rest of us were too pleased and are still too pleased not to know about, not to ask about, not to think about. These 6 men were at the crux of it all." And then this statement, "and they are telling us that we need to stop it." I was stunned. I wondered if I was hearing them correctly. They're now saying that both sides really need to talk, with the emphasis on really. We've been hearing rhetoric about talks and have seen dramatic sessions over the decades. But they're saying now, from their perspective, it's even more urgent. No excuses accepted. They say things like, you can't make peace by military means. That sounds like heresy in their circle of hardline friends and allies. But they have had it their way. They have been calling the shots. And now they've concluded together, all six, that things have only gotten worse. Terrorism has a way of feeding on itself. But what do? You just sit back, not do anything? Or do you fight back in kind? Now, they agree that establishing a Palestinian state to exist alongside Israel is essential. It is very difficult to contemplate how to get it to happen, but it's essential in their minds. None of these Jewish patriots has changed his loyalty to Israel or its right to exist. That's not the issue. They know that their enemies still pledge to drive them into the sea, and they're determined that that's not going to happen. But as tempting as violence is, it hasn't worked. They, of all people, are saying that it can't. And that's what's astounding. As one man said to a political enemy in this struggle, our goal is to make you suffer. We don't believe we can defeat you outright, but it gives us great solace to think that we have hurt you. Think about that. That's a prescription for mutual death and destruction. And it will take a different kind of courage indeed to turn it around. We hear of new peace talks in the Middle East. It's been in the news. But I'm reading the tea leaves, I'm listening for any enthusiasm, and it's like the response seems to be, here we go again. New settlements will be built in Gaza, and new settlements will be torn down in Gaza, and each time people will be killed. Each transition. And once in a great while, when some of the leaders have made great strides toward a nonviolent settlement, and the world has had reason to hope, a key leader has been assassinated for helping to make those very concessions. In other words, if I really believe that I will dishonor the blood of my ancestors if I make any concessions to them, mutual death is the only possible outcome. And they're saying that's unacceptable now. These security bosses know that the only thing that will make for peace in Israel is not more killing, not more intimidation, but of all things, trust. That's a soft and fuzzy kind of concept. They haven't dealt with that. They've dealt with weapons and plans and intercepted messages. Trust. And this is a precious commodity that isn't found in great supply in the Middle East. The Middle East has known little peace for literally thousands of years. It's just been a hotbed. Israel's history, they look back to the time when David and Solomon were prime. That's a very brief time in the history of the Middle East, because the rest of those decades and centuries, Israel was usually dominated by other powers, enslaved. Jesus was born when Rome happened to be ruling it. But even the powerful Roman Empire discovered that their normal ways of dealing with outbursts didn't work so well in the Middle East, and they had to learn that the hard way, which is really why Jesus was killed. He was killed because he was disruptive. They were afraid of another revolution, and they just said, we have to keep it down. And of course, by killing him, it didn't stop him, did it? Psalm 20 writes about life there maybe 3,000 years ago. And it has this key line, some boast of chariots and horses. In other words, we're going to rely on these things. If we have better chariots and horses and weapons, we will dominate. We will earn God's favor. But then they go on to say, we boast instead in the name of the Lord our God. Now make no mistake, the Israelites wanted to win military victory as much as anybody else. And it was easy to ignore God's calls for peace and justice because they seemed frankly naive, stupid, suicidal. They still do. And they suffer the same dilemmas that we suffer today. If they were eager to live by the sword, it often turned that they inevitably died by it. Same sword. And then their own prophets would condemn them for having compromised their faith and sold their souls to the war machine. Very difficult creative tensions there. Really listening to God and following requires a deep conversion. I'm glad the film really upset me because it means that I really heard it. But I couldn't stay there. So then where do we turn? That's when I came upon this quote from, of all people, a Christian bishop. "We are God's children, created in God's image, made for love and laughter, caring and sharing. I am filled with hope for the future. In spite of much to the contrary, the world is becoming a kinder, safer place. It is God's world, and God is in charge. God's gifts of goodness and kindness, reason and understanding, science and discovery are showered upon us. Revel in these gifts, enjoy them, share them, and this new millennium will become a highway of peace and prosperity for all." Doesn't that sound naive? Especially in light of the harsh realities I've just enumerated in the Middle East. How can God possibly be in charge, some of us say, in a world with such cruelty and bloodshed? It's an honest question, and one of the most difficult we will ever ask. But this bishop just doesn't seem to get it. Seems to, warm and fuzzy and sugar-coated. He's been in his ivory tower too long. He doesn't know what really is going on in life. But I didn't tell you who he is yet. Those words were shared by Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. He was a key player in helping the South Africans to move from their own history of cruelty and bloodshed and revenge to a country with a future based on, of all things, reconciliation and cooperation among the races. If you've seen the movie Invictus, which talks about the history of Mandela and how when he formed a new security police to protect him, Black Africans were the ones. But then he insisted that some of the former security officers, the white ones, who many of the blacks said, they treated us badly, you have to learn to work with them. We don't want to work with them. Well, you have to. And they did. And they protected Mandela because he was their president. But Mandela knew that this was not going to be an easy walkthrough with just a little bit of rhetoric. It was going to take changed behavior. No one foresaw what would happen in South Africa. I count it as one of the key political miracles I have witnessed in my life. So Bishop Tutu has been there. He's not a naive bystander locked in an ivory tower. He is one of the living examples that there is another way, a better way. But it is extremely difficult because it involves forgiving the seemingly unforgivable. But we know it can be done because it has. Bishop Tutu spoke at my daughter Lynn's college graduation in 2000. I happened to be waiting by a walkway to the side of the front stage looking for a relative so I could direct him back to where we were seated quite a ways away. And while I'm standing there, up comes Bishop Tutu being driven in a golf cart. He was not in the best of health, and I was like 25 feet away from him, just standing there. I stared at him in disbelief, so close to such a great man. His eyes met mine, and we nodded. For a brief moment, he acknowledged my presence. I nodded back. Never spoke any words. I was struck by how small of stature he is, but how huge on the inside. What a heart for peace. What a heart for God. I felt lifted just being near him. See, we desperately need to be inspired by people like him today, who seem bigger than life, and who invite us to entertain the impossible, because with God all things are possible. And it's when we tempt what seems impossible is often when we experience God and turn the Spirit loose. The painful parts of today's message, the images will linger in me and perhaps in you, but I think that's a good thing. Think of them as breaking open the crust of our hearts so that the seeds, just seeds, of hope and love can find a place to take root and grow. Otherwise, they tend to bounce off the hard crust. And another parable Jesus told about the sower and the seeds. Birds get them or they get baked. They just don't take root. We need to have our hearts broken open in order for them to have roots and produce. Because if the top security people in Israel now see that their approach has failed, anything can happen. And don't forget the words of this man. I am filled with hope for the future. Crazy and naive? Sure. But the practical war planners have seen that that path leads literally to a dead end. So I'm saying it's time to be a little crazy for God. So if this battle-tested man of diminutive stature has such hope in the impossible, I need to find out why. And so do the Palestinians and the Israelis. World peace depends on it. Amen.